There are a few games in the Resident Evil franchise that sparks a flame of hate like Resident Evil 6. To some players, it represents everything that went wrong with the series. Too much action, messy story, and a complete departure from survival horror. But here's the thing, over a decade later, the conversation around Resident Evil 6 is starting to change. Resident Evil 6 isn't a bad game. In fact, it might be one of the most ambitious and mechanically interesting games Capcom has ever made. So today I wanted to defend Resident Evil 6, not by pretending like it's the most perfect game to ever be made, but by explaining why it deserves far more credit than it gets.
I said she asked you to leave.
One thing people forget about with Resident Evil 6 is just how insanely ambitious the game really is, especially for today's standards, as many games don't take this level of risk. Capcom tried to make 4 different Resident Evil experiences in one package. You had Leon's horror-focused campaign, Chris's military campaign, Jake's high-energy action campaign, and Ada's more mysterious stealth-driven missions. Each campaign intersected with others, creating a massive global narrative involving bioterror attacks wreaking havoc in multiple countries. Few games even attempted something like this for various reasons, and while the execution wasn't always on point, the scale of Resident Evil 6 was huge. I see this game as Capcom's attempt to make a Final Fantasy scaled Resident Evil game, with how insanely high quality the game is, even to this day, with cinematic views, in-depth mechanics, and large blockbuster cutscenes to boot. At launch, it was one of the most largest games in the franchise, with multiple campaigns, cooperative gameplay, and additional modes to sink more hours of your time. For a single-player game in 2012, that level of scope was honestly impressive. Here's where Resident Evil 6 gets really misunderstood. Its combat system is generally one of the most advanced in the series, even with the newest game right now, Resident Evil Requiem. Unlike earlier Resident Evil games, you're not locked into slow shooting mechanics. Instead, the game allows shooting while moving, something that was already presented like in spin-off titles. I have no idea why it took so long for it to be in the mainline entry, but whatever. Sliding into enemies, countering enemies, and fighting while on the ground. Once you understand the system, the gameplay becomes incredibly fluid. The problem is that the game never properly teaches you how the game mechanics actually work. So many players, including myself, never really finished the entire, campaign without realizing just how much freedom the gameplay actually offers. The combat system is really good actually once you sink your actual teeth into it. But given how a lot of people never really rush back to the game to do replays and such for obvious reasons, it's kind of a shame. Because mechanically, Resident Evil 6 might actually be one of the most expressive action systems Capcom ever built. It's clear that Capcom knows this, as you can see Resident Evil Requiem using aspects of RE6, but refining them, like the way finishes are, or even using weapons to finish off enemies. Who knows, maybe they were just experimenting using these aspects and probably refining them for a potential remake of 6 down the line. Okay, I'm definitely going to stop you there, as I've never really experienced RE co-op before. Well, I have now lately, but that was through Mercenaries, not the main campaign, so if you're wondering why this section is so brief, you know why. But from what I hear, a lot of people mention how RE5, I was gonna say RE5, how RE6 is, and when I think about it, the game is heavily designed pretty much around this, much more than RE5, probably because they realized how much of a hit that game really was. My gosh. So it's no brainer decision to add these deep mechanics, or deep aspects of co-op play into RE6. At certain points, you'll even encounter other characters from other campaigns, briefly fighting alongside them before continuing your own story. That aspect is really amazing, and it doesn't feel like these stories are isolated and truly a part of a larger narrative the game is going for. That concept is hardly used, but it's really solid, and thankful that RE6 even included it in the first place. Like, it really has flabbergasted me, and just overall shocked me in how it actually uses it very effectively. One thing I can agree with regardless though is that the game becomes significantly more fun with a friend. Although it becomes super tense as you have to be more cautious, so it actually amps up the horror side in my opinion, or what little left this game actually offers in the horror department.
Ask for more money. A lot more. Pretty sure this wasn't part of the contract. push.
A major criticism of Resident Evil 6 is that it's too ridiculous. Explosions, helicopters, BOWs, size of a building. But here's the thing, Resident Evil has always been ridiculous. Let's not pretend like this franchise is as grounded in realism as something like The Last of Us. The series, in my opinion, hasn't been as grounded since Resident Evil 1. We're talking about a series where giant snakes exist, bulky zombies carrying rocket launchers, balding punching humans, and sunglasses Virgil wannabes exist. Even with all that ridiculousness added, we still take these stories seriously. Resident Evil 6 simply just leans into the blockbuster direction the series had been known for. If I'm going to be honest, it was inevitable that Resident Evil 6 was going to go in this direction. As I previously mentioned, that RE5 was a massive success, and when you realized what that game had to offer, it's only natural that Resident Evil 6 was going to go this way.
Balance. I'm fine. Sherry Birkin, the United States.
Yeah, good for you, but now's not really the time.
When people talk about the problems or the definitive with Resident Evil 6, it's usually the story. It's big, it's messy, and at times it feels like it's trying to juggle way too many things at once. But I think it's a worthy attempt at making a larger-than-life story. As a global outbreak, it wouldn't just be centered around one character than what previous storylines been about. Again, I'm not excusing this story at all because it easily fumbles the bag. You're meant to see this bioterror crisis affect the world, but it doesn't achieve this aspect as well. The max it achieved with the scale of like Raccoon City with the outbreak in China. Resident Evil 6 felt like it wasn't ready to make that big of a leap. Yet you can see otherwise with its trying to appeal to everyone at the same time. I mean, each campaign literally differs so heavily. Leon's story is a classic horror style, Gris, which is straight up Call of Duty, the most boring and painful one to play through. Jake is high energy driven with carrying elements of stalker horror with the Tyrant. And the last but least, Ada's story, which is very stealth driven as I mentioned before. This one feels the most random, as the stealth sections could be a hit or miss if I'm being honest, and can get really frustrating. And I have no idea why the campaign is like made out to be this be-all end-all when it comes to Ada. It doesn't really offer much satisfaction the way it makes it out to be. People often say that the game suffered from having too many mechanics and gameplay styles packed together. Funny because when you look back at Resident Evil 6, it's like a celebration of the gameplay styles that came before. Resident Evil 6's biggest strength is also its weakness. Also, the villain is straight up garbage, basically being an Ada Wong simp. It's not technically a bad thing, as I'm pretty sure the Steam community tab for Resident Evil 4 Remake will have your backing. But Simmons is nowhere near the heights of some of the smaller villains. We're not even gonna put like Heights of Wesker or Sadler on the same sort of table or conversation here.
Goddamn BSAA, what the hell are you shooting at?
Everyone in your platoon is one of those Juavo now. And you're dressed.
Another thing people forget about is that Resident Evil 6 was not a commercial failure. In fact, it's actually one of the best-selling games in the franchise. As of now, Resident Evil 6 is currently at 14.1 million copies worldwide across all the platforms. Now yes, the game didn't initially meet Capcom's extremely high expectations, and the mixed reception caused the company to rethink the series' direction. But RE6 has managed to turn out really well over the years, catching up to its other siblings. But it definitely divided the fan base way more than the last two entries. Capcom even opted for smaller and less costly experiences. You can see that with things like Revelations 2 or even heck Resident Evil 7. Something interesting has happened over the years. More players have started revisiting Resident Evil 6, and when you approach the game without the expectations of traditional survival horror experience, it becomes much more easier to appreciate. It's not the scariest Resident Evil game, but it is ambitious, mechanically deep, packed with content, and incredibly fun in co-op. And I know I went hard about its story, but the development of each character is really amazing. Resident Evil 6 isn't perfect, the pacing can 100% drag at times, and yes, the game probably tries to do too many things at once, but it makes up for high quality visuals, cinematic spectacles, mechanically deep gameplay, and delivering some amazing content. This video has been stuck in my mind since my previous Resident Evil 6 videos, so make sure to check them out afterwards. Hope you guys enjoyed this one a lot as it was super fun to work on. Let me know in the comments whether you disagree or agree, and tell me, have you revisited Resident Evil 6 recently? Of course, be sure to like and subscribe for more horror content here on the channel. Hope to see you all in the next one.